national headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital. Hello again, everybody, and happy Friday. One of the things we like to do on this newscast, which I know you like because, well, you've told us you like this, is the fact that we're constantly searching for stories that you essentially won't see anywhere else. We think we have found that again with a trend story. Here's what we have found out. The number of encounters, right, between Russian fighter jets and U.S. or NATO reconnaissance or spy planes, as they're often called, seems to be increasing of late. This is fascinating. That's according to reports that we have been monitoring both from U.S. and Russian military sources. So what I want to do is I want to take you through some of the video that has been coming in, which seems to reflect this, right? Here we go. Look at this. Look at the speed with which this Russian Su-27 fighter jet, you see it right there on the right? It's going to intercept and escort away this U.S. RC-135, right? You're looking at it right there. This is over the Baltic Sea, by the way. This is over the Baltic Sea, right near the Russian border. And as you might expect, Russia, look, like any other country, it gets a little hinky about somebody encroaching, up on its border, up on its space, as young people like to say. So this is why Russian fighter jets seem to be playing almost this constant game of cat and mouse with NATO planes. Here's another example. Put this one up if you can, Kev. This is a U.S. B-52. It's heading right for the Russian Federation airspace. Russia immediately scrambles two more Su-27s, is what the fighter jets are called. The fighter jets then seem to like head off this strategic bomber, which is what the Russians are calling it. It heads off the strategic bomber and then makes it go into like another direction. You're watching this? Fascinating, right? So the question is, why are we seeing more and more of these types of chases, right? And what's it say about U.S.-Russo relations? This is the news with Rick Sanchez, where we keep you connected with our world because we believe it's time to do news again. Russian military defenders call it snooping. That's the word they've been using, snooping. And they say that the number of foreign military jets snooping near Russian borders seems to have grown dramatically in recent years. And there does seem to be a pattern. And each time it happens, Russian fighter jets are scrambled to try and ward off the offenders. Now, right, one would imagine the same thing is probably happening in converse. Planes often encroach U.S. airspace. So let's talk about this. This is becoming an important conversation we want to share with you. Joining us now is somebody who knows how this game is played only too well. Why? Jim Jatras is a former U.S. diplomat. I think you know what I want to do? I want to start by reading to you some of the stuff that we have found that's being written on both sides. This comes from a Russian military source. They say that whenever the fighter jets from Russia, Jim, quote, head off one of these strategic bombers, the Russians are then accused of being aggressors, sometimes even called irresponsible. Are the Russians acting irresponsibly?
Not from what I can see. I think I mentioned my dad's a retired fighter pilot. Back during the first Cold War, this was routine. You would go up and scramble planes to escort bombers that got too close to your airspace, sometimes coming within feet of them. So there's nothing unusual there. However, the questions we should be asking is, why are we doing this now? Why do we need this new Cold War? And let's also keep in mind, this is happening on the Russian side, primarily close to major population centers, near St. Petersburg, as opposed to, say, Alaska, where sometimes we intercept Russian bombers.
Can you do me a favor? Because you're a diplomat, you understand these types of relationships. Make us understand, as Americans, the Russian perspective on this.
As near as I can tell, the unfortunate thing is they actually seem to listen to what people are saying and writing about them here. The constant stream of demonization. Your president's a thug. You're not a real country. You're a gas station. Everything wrong in the world, you've done it. You've hacked elections. You're undermining democracy. And then we talk about deploying additional forces. Remember, just last week in the National Interest, there was a report that these B-52s are now going to be outfitted with nuclear-armed cruise missiles. So this is not just surveillance. This is not just snooping. You couple that with the cancellation of the INF agreement and talk about deployment of missiles in Europe that would have literally zero warning time for destroying Russia's major population centers. They take this extremely serious. We could say, oh, that's ridiculous. They're just being paranoid. All right, is it a good idea to go around poking at a paranoid to see how he reacts?
Well, the United States is surrounded by oceans, the Pacific on one side, the Atlantic on the other, and then we've got Canada and Mexico who are essentially in our pocket. It's not the same with Russia, is it?
No, it's not. And that's where I think, again, it's very hard for American policymakers to put, and frankly, they don't care to put themselves mentally into the shoes of the other guy. What of another power? The Russians or the Chinese were encroaching on our dominance of, say, the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico. How would we react? Well, that's different because we're us and they're them, so we don't ever look at things that way.
There's also talk about what's going on, especially in the Baltic area, which is close to what we like to call the North Pole, you know, the Arctic area. Is that going to become the new frontier, and is that a place that could create some aggressions?
I think it's one of the theaters. So whether we're talking about Ukraine, whether we're talking about the Baltic, or whether we're talking about the maneuvers that NATO has been running in the Arctic area, I think they feel we can put a full court press on the Russians as part of a concerted campaign of sanctions and other ways to undermine their economy and ultimately to arrange for a kind of a regime change in Russia.
By the way, I mentioned the reports that I read this morning as I was doing my research on this story from the Russian side. We also read from, quote, U.S. military news sources that we are now putting up as many B-52s, the United States is, and NATO is, as we did during the Iraq War. Does that surprise you as much as it surprised me?
No, I don't find it surprising. I find it troubling because, again, why are we doing this? What is our national interest in doing this? I don't see how we gain from...
To show the Russians who's the boss?
And of course, a year ago, when they unveiled some very advanced weapons, President Putin said, look, we've been trying to tell you how dangerous this is. Now that we have these weapons, are you listening now? And the short answer is no, they're not listening now. And they made even more such responses after the cancellation of the INF agreement.
This is a smart conversation. I'm glad we had it. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
I'm Rick Sanchez. You found us on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you know what? I'm also live every night at 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern on DirecTV and Dish and cable and satellite, the RT app, and Pluto TV. I'll see you there.